At this point, I think everyone is familiar with the importance of barrels. If you can break them, that's a good thing. If you can't break them, you just found yourself the first major red flag. Hey guys, how's it going? It's me Fermyon here, and today I will be taking a look at Dark Fantasy Warriors, an indie Soulslike available on Steam. It advertises itself as a difficult game that's extremely dark. You will see why this is going to be relevant later. After watching an extremely hyper-edited trailer that is by all means seizure-inducing, we go to check out some of the reviews this game has. It's currently sitting at a mixed score, with some wildly interesting comments. Thought this would keep my mind off Elden Ring for a while. But when I think about how I could have donated the 49 cents I spent on this game to my local homeless shelter, it makes me feel even worse about my purchase. Worst part is, I bought this game for 2 other people too. Idea is good, about create game like Dark Souls, but it's not even a game because Dark Fantasy Warriors have nothing, and I mean hashtag nothing at all. But enough of that, let's just get into it and see the game for ourselves. We start off and it's extremely loud. I don't want anyone's ears to suffer, so don't worry, I will make sure to lower the volume during video editing, because this game does not feature the option to tune your sound effects, your music or anything of that sort. I kind of dislike this, because if we're being honest, having an options menu is pretty much the most basic thing that should be implemented. I understand it's an indie game, but still. I remember 20 years ago you would find all sorts of Flash games on Newgrounds that have already figured out the importance of options, regardless if it's for sound or graphical quality. Either way, to say something nice, I want to take a moment and compliment the fact that there's actually a proper tutorial available. It's pretty much just a video that plays constantly that shows the various controls and also demonstrates the actions you can make. Granted, it could be improved. It would be much better if you could just select parts of the video you want to play. But beggars can be choosers, I guess. Anyway, with all this knowledge, we're ready to start the game. The first major thing that differentiates it from a typical Souls-like is that you don't create your own character and you don't really have your own build. Instead, you're given a character that has it all covered. You can use anything you want, from melee to ranged, in the form of bows and magic, that uses both offensive and defensive spells. You also have the option to take your weapons off and just fight with your fists, which, I will be honest, was a pleasant surprise. Unfortunately though, gear is pretty boring. You do have 2 swords from the get-go, but the reality is that they are just a weapon skin and offer nothing else. Melee combat in general is disappointing. The saving grace is that dodge rolling actually feels pretty good, even though from what I've noticed, you don't get many iframes, and I think it's likely you don't get any at all. You can also parry, but that also feels sluggish. I'm sorry Sekiro enjoyers, I really tried my best, I promise. That said, even if melee combat is lacking, I can confidently say that I enjoyed using a bow and magic, despite all the jank that comes with it. Let's start off with the bow combat. I can't confirm it, but based on my testings, it seems that bows can actually one-shot enemies, or at the very least, deal a lot of damage when you land a headshot. Skyrim stealth archery is back on the menu, boys. The only thing that bothers me when it comes to the bow combat is that the hitboxes seem a bit weird when enemies are carrying a shield. You can aim for the feet, but whether or not you hit them is something completely random. As for the magic combat itself, I have to say there's one thing I really like about it, and it's the fact that you have to aim your spells. Think of it as having a third-person shooter, but with Dark Souls, and instead of guns, you have magic. You can lock onto an enemy, but that won't do much besides having your camera fixate onto that target. Now, onto the magic. You have a bunch of offensive spells, and a bunch of defensive spells as well, or rather, supporting spells. First and foremost, you do have a few buffs. You do have an ethereal sword and an ethereal bow, which I think is very cool. And besides that, you can also buff your character with increased health and I assume increased defense. It's not actually very clear what some of these spells do, at least when it comes to the buffing section, but when it comes to the offensive ones, you have a basic fireball, you have a ground AoE, You also have another ground AoE, which is kind of like a trap that only triggers when an enemy steps into it. You have a vampire ability, which is going to suck the life out of your opponent. And of course, you can also become Palpatine for a moment if you want to. And last but not least, you also have the healing magic. It's important to mention here that your mana is constantly refilling, pretty much like the stamina bar. So in that sense, you do have infinite heals. Just something I think it's good to keep in mind. But anyway, as I was saying, I think magic is great. I am baffled by just how different these spells and their functions are. I think it's mainly surprising since for melee you don't really have many options, except one sword, but your magic arsenal is really impressive when it comes to variance. There's also the teleport, which ended up being the most fun ability in the game. It's just nice being able to go wherever you want on the map. That said, you have to be careful where you teleport, since you might end up in an area full of enemies, and you're unable to see everything because it's pitch black, and you don't even have any brightness options, so... To be fair, the game did say it was gonna be extremely dark, but this is too much. I end up dying and I have to restart from the beginning. Not too much of a big deal, but I do want to say that the game claims to have a save function, but it simply doesn't work. I don't think I have to explain why this is a bad thing, but hopefully it's gonna get fixed, which, let's be honest, it's most likely not gonna get fixed, but it is what it is. In any case, I clear my way through a bunch of enemies like it was Dark Souls 2, and I end up meeting the first boss this game has to offer. And how do I beat him? It's simple, really. You see, if Bloodborne has taught me anything, it's that doors can be used to stop enemies from chasing you. The same logic applies here. After giving him an arrow to the knee, I proceed forward and end up asking one of life's biggest questions. If there's any architect watching, I want to know something. How can this structure stand still? If the pillars that are meant to support the building are all broken. And with that out of the way, I end up in the next level. I am very hopeful that the game will actually save this time. Speaking of negatives, I want to say that the enemy variety doesn't really exist, so I just have to fight through the same mobs I've had all the way until now. There's also chests lying around that cannot be opened. Trust me, I pressed every button I could, but nothing worked. By accident, I end up dying once again, and it takes me back to the beginning of the game. Unfortunately, saving really doesn't work. I think at this point it's safe to say that the game itself can be fun for an hour or two, but sadly it doesn't have too much going on for it. Still, I gotta admit, it's a lot better than what I expected, and honestly, I got some nice laughs out of it. Anyway, that's about it for today. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you again soon. If you want to play a game like this that's actually good, I recommend Dark Souls 2. Take care, everybody.